Hello and welcome. I am so glad that you have joined me today. We're continuing in our study in the book of Judges, and we're looking at Judges chapter 16 today, continuing with Samson, and we'll finish him off. So grab yourself a cuppa and we'll get started. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. And a trigger warning for today is that it will contain some gory references. Verse 1. One day Samson went to Gaza where he saw a prostitute. He went in and spent the night with her. So Samson, he travels to Gaza, an area within the Israelite territory, but it was controlled and inhabited by the Philistines at the time. Again, we see him pursuing encounters with the Philistines. And what does he see there? He sees a prostitute. Why has Samson gone there in the first place? Why is he looking for trouble? In the last chapter, it records that he led Israel for 20 years, but he is immoral, he's seeing prostitutes, and he's far from the perfect leader. Verse 2, the people in Gaza were told, Samson is here, so they surrounded the place and lay in wait for him all night at the city gate. They made no move during the night, saying, at dawn we'll kill him. But Samson lay there only until the middle of the night, and when he got up, he took hold of the doors of the city gate, together with the two posts, and he tore them loose, bar and all. He lifted them to his shoulders, and he carried them to the top of the hill that faces Hebron. So Samson finds out somehow, we're not told how, that the men of Gaza plan to kill him at the dawn of the next morning. So he gets up in the middle of the night. He could have just peacefully walked away from the city and headed northeast to his home in Zorah in the tribe of Dan, but no, he just can't drop it. He just can't just simply walk away. He has to take action. Samson carried off the gates of Gaza and he carried them up the hill toward Hebron in a sort of defiance of the Philistines, who thought that they had held him securely behind the gates because the gates were barred. But no doubt Samson thought that he had done a great thing when he carried those gates off and he broke loose the power that had held him. Despite his sin of being with a Philistine prostitute, God still gave Samson supernatural strength to escape again from the Philistines. And God did this so that God's purpose is bigger than Samson himself. And because God uses Samson despite Samson's sin, not because of it. And now we get to probably the most well-known part of the life of Samson. We come and we see Deliliah. Verse 4, sometime later he fell in love with a woman in the valley of Sorek whose name was Deliliah. So the Sorek River, it marked the border, like the southern border of Dan, and it serves as a boundary between the Danites, which are the Israelites, and the Philistines. He had the whole area of Dan to live in. Why do we find him at the border? It's as if to say he's sort of playing a game. How close can I get to the Philistines without actually being in their territory? And Samson meets and he becomes infatuated with the Philistine woman again. She's called Deliliah. Verse 5. The rulers of the Philistines went to her and said, see if you can lure him into showing him the secret of his strength and how we can overpower him so that we can tie him up and subdue him. Each one of us will give you 1,100 shekels of silver. The Philistines have learned that Samson's supernatural strength, and they bribed Deliliah to uncover its secret in order to overpower him. And the Philistine rulers offered Deliliah money to obtain Samson's secret about his strength, and Deliliah, she accepts the offer. So people who bribe others and those who accept bribes convince themselves that bribery is okay because it's mutually beneficial for both parties. But whenever there is a mutual benefit for both parties, there is a cost to greater society. So how much was the bribe worth? A shekel was at first a unit of weight, and later it became a unit of currency in Judea. In the New Testament times, the shekel was the currency, but here in the Old Testament, it's a measure of weight. Deliliah was offered 1,100 shekels of silver as a approximately 13 kilograms of silver. It was a great fortune to a prostitute. So in 2025, this equated to about $21,500. It seems that each Philistine rulers were each going to give her 1,100 shekels of silver, but it could be debated that they together were going to give her 1,100 shekels of silver. But either way, it's a significant amount of wealth. Verse 6, so Delilah said to Samson, "Tell me the secret of your great strength and how you can be tied up and subdued." And Samson answered her, "If anyone ties me with 7 fresh bowstrings that have not been dried, I will be weaker than any other man." And some commentators suggest that Samson didn't actually know that his hair was the secret of his strength and was just guessing or eliminating options. Other commentators suggest that he did know all along and he was just playing a game with her. But both perspectives, it suggests that Samson was playing the fool's game of Russian roulette. And of course, the next step that follows, taking a bribe, is betraying a friend. So Delilah's next step after taking a bribe is to betray Samson. Then the rulers, verse 8, then the rulers of the Philistines brought her 7 fresh bowstrings that had not been dried, and she tied him with them. With the men hidden in her room, she called out, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." But he snapped the bowstrings as easily a piece of string when it comes close to a flame. So the secret of his strength was not discovered. And then Delilah says to him, "You have made a fool of me. You have lied to me. Come now, tell me the secret of how you can be tied." Verse 8 says, "You have made a fool to me. You have lied to me," Delilah says. So really, who's making a fool of who? Avoiding taking responsibility for their actions or by shifting blame to the victim is a classic textbook manipulative behaviour. Verse 11, "If anyone ties me securely with new ropes that have never been used, I will become as weak as any other man." This is Samson said that. Not once has Samson chosen a suitable woman of integrity who he can trust. You would think that he's learnt by now, but he hasn't. His lustful desires mask his rational thought. So Delilah, verse 12, she takes new ropes and she ties him. And then the men hidden in her room, she calls out, she says, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." But he snaps those ropes off his arms as if they were just threads. And Delilah says to Samson, "All this time you have been making a fool of me and lying to me. Tell me how you can be tied." And Samson, he still hasn't learnt. Goes on, he replied, "If you were to weave 7 braids of my hair into the fabric of the loom and tighten it with a pin, I will become as weak as any other man." So while he was sleeping, Delilah took the 7 braids of his head, wove them into the fabric, and tightened them with a pin. And again she called out to him, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." He awoke from his sleep, and he pulled out the pin of the loom with the fabric. Now it's getting closer. His answers are getting closer and closer to the real truth, which is the strength is in his hair. It's just interesting to note that looms come in various sizes. It doesn't say here if it was sort of a smaller loom or if it was a larger loom for making quantities of fabric. Then, verse 15, then she said to him, "How can you say I love you when you don't even confide in me? This is the 3rd time you've made a fool of me and haven't told me the secret of your great strength." And with such nagging, she probed him day after day until he was sick to death of it. It's probably at this time, if not any time earlier, that Samson should have left her. He should have closed his mouth, he should have zipped up his pants and headed home. But Samson is so concerned about himself, he is willing to lie to a woman that he supposedly loves. Delilah tries to get the truth out of Samson 3 times. And after constant and relentless nagging, she finally wore him down. She broke his resolve, and the 4th attempt he gave in. Verse 17, so he told her everything. "No razor has ever been used on my head," he said, "because I have been a Nazarite dedicated to God from my mother's womb. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me, and I would become as weak as any other man." And then Delilah saw that he had told her everything, and she sent word to the rulers of the Philistines, "Come back Once more, he has told me everything. So the rulers of the Philistines, they returned with the silver in their hands, and after putting him to sleep on her lap, she calls for someone to shave off the 7 braids of hair, and so began to subdue him, and his strength left him. No doubt, Delilah used some sweet words to lull Samson to sleep. Her pretend love for Samson was for the sake of money. It is deeply troubling. Perhaps Samson was really fooled into thinking that perhaps she did care for him. It is terribly sad. Verse 20. Then she called, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. And he awoke from his sleep and thought, I'll just go out as before and shake myself free. But he did not know that the Lord had left him. How sad is it that Samson did not know that the Lord had left him? It was so sad to see that the Spirit of the Lord left Samson and he didn't even realize it. He did not sense that his actions had made the Spirit fly away. It is a tragedy. But it's true. When there is no emphasis on personal relationship and commitment to the Lord, how would anyone notice if the Spirit had left them? It needs to be said that his hair was not actually magical, but it represented his dedication to God. So commentator David Guzik, he suggests that Samson's strength was not in his hair, but in his relationship with God. He worked against that relationship to the point where God finally departed from him, in the sense that he no longer blessed Samson with supernatural strength. Verse 21, the Philistines seized him. They gouged out his eyes and took him to Gaza, binding him with bronze shackles. They set him grinding grain in prison. So Samson's foolishness, his lust and his rage has left him blind and shackled and in prison and doing a woman's job of grinding grain. It's humiliating. Verse 22, but the hair on his head began to grow again after it had been shaved. So Spurgeon, he says, when Samson's hair began to grow, what did it prophesy? First, well, it prophesied hope for Samson. I will be bound to say that he put his hand on his head and he felt that it was getting bristly, and he put his hand on his beard and found it rough. Yes, 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 it is coming, he thought to himself. It'll be right. It will be all right soon. I shall get my strength back again. My hair is growing, and I'll be able to strike a blow for my people and my God yet. Thank you, Spurgeon. Verse 23. Now the rulers of the Philistines assembled to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon, their god, and to celebrate, saying, our God has delivered Samson, our enemy, into our hands. And when the people saw him, they praised their God, saying, our God has delivered our enemy into our hands, the one who laid waste in our land has multiplied the slain. So the Philistines, they're worshipping Dagon and praising him for imprisoning and weakening Samson. They said, our God, they basically said, our God is stronger than Israel's God because we've conquered Samson. And sadly, sometimes our disobedience of God, there's other people, the disobedience of God's followers leads other people to deny God. Dagon, so the god they're worshipping, he was a chief deity for the Philistines, and the worship of the pagan god dates back to the 3rd millennium BC. He was a fish god, so Dag actually means fish, so Dagon means fish, and he was represented as half man, half fish, so a fish-like creature. Verse 25, while they were all in high spirits, they shouted, bring out Samson to entertain us. So they called Samson out of prison, and he performed for them. When they stood him among the pillars, Samson said to the servant who held his hand, put me where I can feel the pillars that support the temple, so that I may lean against them. Now the temple was crowded with men and women. All rulers of Philistine were there. On the roof there were about 3,000 men and women watching Samson's performance. And Samson prayed to the Lord, sovereign God, remember me. Please, God, strengthen me just once, and let me, with one blow, get revenge on the Philistines for my 2 eyes. So even Samson's dying request has a flavour of personal vengeance. It starts off really good. He asked God for strength, not to judge the Philistines, but to free Israel from their, not to judge the Philistines and to free Israel from their oppression, which he was supposed to do. But we see he wants his prayer answered because he wants to take vengeance for losing his eyes. All that Samson ever did was personal. It was always his own individual will to take revenge on the Philistines, not really a desire to bring honour to our God. Now, verse 28, it's interesting to see, we see the Lord's mentioned, sovereign Lord is mentioned, God is mentioned. So Samson prays using all three Hebrew names for God. In the Hebrew translation, you'll see Yahweh, you'll see Elohim, and then you'll see Adonai. And this suggests that Samson knew and he revered God, recognizing his attributes and power. Verse 29, when Samson reached toward the two central pillars on which the temple stood, bracing himself against them, his right hand on one and his left hand on the other, Samson said, "Let me die with the Philistines." And then he pushed with all his might, and down came the temple on the rulers and all the people in it. Thus he killed many more people when he died than when he lived. So Samson's end was both bitter and sweet. God answered his last prayer, and he achieved his greatest victory against the Philistines at the cost of his own life. Verse 31, then his brothers and his father's whole family went down to get him. They brought him back and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol in the tomb of Manoah his father. And he led Israel for 20 years. So thinking of that prayer that Samson prayed, let's consider the difference between Samson's prayer about defeating the Philistines and how David approached a battle with the Philistines. So the David and Goliath, that famous battle. There was a distinct difference about the way David approached the battle with the Philistines in comparison with the way Samson handled the Philistines. Samson only calls on God when he's thirsty or when he wants revenge from the Philistines because of what they did to his eyes. But David honoured God with the victories, and he proclaimed God to the Philistines when he fought Goliath. Let's read what David said. So it's in 1 Samuel 17, verse 45 to 47. David said to the Philistine, that is Goliath, "You come against me with the sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you with the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I'll strike you down and I will cut off your head. This very day I will give the carcass of the Philistines' army to the birds and the wild armies, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, but the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you all into our hands." And it is no wonder that David is called a man after God's own heart. He is portrayed as a man who lived in accordance with God's will, demonstrated faith, and sought to please God above all else. Whereas Samson thought he could use God's and the gifts he had given him for his own personal gain. And we would be lying if we said we never fail to do the same arrogance as what Samson does. We can sometimes try to use God and his gifts for our own personal gain, whether it be to get ahead in our job or to gain approval from friends or to just show off our talents at church. Instead of falling away from God as Samson did, we should shed our arrogance and turn to him. Let us adjust our view of God. He is not someone that we can manipulate to use for our own selfishness. He is God. He is worthy of our worship and adoration and thanksgiving. Let us worship him in the way that we live our lives and how we use our giftings for his glory. Samson is listed in Hebrews chapter 11 as a man of great faith, and it is surprising that it is Samson who's included here. Hypothetically speaking, the story of Samson might have played out differently if he honoured God with his whole life. But God still uses all of Samson's bad decisions to achieve his great plan, to use Samson to free Israel from the oppression of the Philistines. God even used Samson's foolishness for his glory. But it does not, but it does make me wonder if Samson had lived a God-honoring life, God would have used that too. And Samson would not have had to live in the mess that his choices created. But if that was the case, perhaps Samson's record would have only just been a few lines long, much like many of the other minor judges. But we would have missed this rich lesson that God uses our mess for his glory. He uses all things. Romans 8 verse 28, we know that in all things God works together for good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. And it is encouraging that God uses us even when we make stupid decisions. So that's all I have for you today from Judges chapter 16. It's been a pleasure again, and I look forward to seeing you next time when we look at Judges chapter 17. Bye.